Amazing story. I'm on Twitter at Anita BBC. You're watching BBC News.
You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News. Protesters in Greece say the train disaster was an accident waiting to happen. 43 people were killed in the crash. The Greek Prime Minister says human error was to blame. Protesting rail workers say they've repeatedly warned the network isn't safe. Angry exchanges between the US and Russia at the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Delhi over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Russia is due to address the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, days before investigators publish a report into Russian war crimes. An area of natural beauty is under threat in the Philippines as a sunken tanker starts to leak oil. And Harry and Meghan are back in the headlines. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been told to vacate their British base of Frogmore Cottage. In the programme, we'll take you live to Greece and hear from our correspondents in India and Israel. There have been protests in Greece over the rail crash which killed 43 people, many seeing it as an accident that had been waiting to happen. We have some live pictures coming to us right now from the scene of that crash near Larissa in central Greece. You can see the clear-up operation is underway, but there is also a big investigation happening, and we know that 3 days of national mourning have been declared when this passenger service crashed head into a freight train, and it caused those front carriages to burst into flames, and many of them were destroyed, some of those front carriages. Nick Beek there, and we'll be live in Athens shortly to talk more about the public outcry over this incredible accident that has killed so many young people as well. So do stay with us for that. State news agencies in Russia say a sabotage group working for Ukraine has infiltrated a border region and has taken several people hostage. According to the governor of Bryansk region, which borders Ukraine, saboteurs fired on a car, killing one person. He added that shelling had also taken place from Ukraine. The incident happening in the village of Lubachanka. Russia's FSB security service says it's trying to engage an armed group of Ukrainian nationalists who have crossed the border. Kyiv, though, hasn't commented, but the Bryansk region is understood to be a base for Russian drone attacks. Well, that's been happening. Russia says there's been no G20 joint declaration. There's been angry exchanges between Washington and Moscow over the invasion of Ukraine. US Secretary of State said the talks have been marred by the unprovoked and unjustified attack, but that the West would be unwavering in its support for Kyiv. Russian officials, meanwhile, said Moscow and Beijing had agreed to oppose what they called Western blackmail and threats. This hasn't been confirmed by China, though. And in the last few minutes, the breaking news is that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said there will be no G20 foreign ministers declaration at the end of the meeting and has blamed the West for that. Well, our US State Department correspondent Barbara Pledasher has travelled to Delhi with Antony Blinken, and she has more now on what he's been saying about Russia. Nikki, thank you so much. Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come, the royal residence row as King Charles takes back the Windsor Castle cottage given to Harry and Meghan by the late Queen Elizabeth. It will explain why the US has had harsh words for Israel following the latest upsurge in violence in the West Bank. You're live with Lucy Hockings. Let's take you back now live to Larissa, and we can see the scene there of this horrific rail crash in Greece. 43 people killed, a huge amount of anger, many seeing this as an accident that had been waiting to happen. And you can see those cranes that have been brought in to try and lift some of the wreckage off the tracks and from the side of that field. A big operation underway and an investigation, of course, into what exactly caused cause this crash. Let's take you now live to Athens and talk to Anthi Karasava, who is Greek correspondent at The Times. Anthi, good to see you. When you see those live pictures in the daylight as well, the horror of the crash is so apparent, and there's national mourning that's been declared in Greece. I can imagine the sense of shock and sadness that is still there. But can you explain to us why there is also this strong public outcry against what's happened? Just to update you on the very latest we are getting from Greece, as we can see these live pictures at the scene of the rail disaster yesterday in Larissa. There is a new transport minister now in charge. This crash killed 42 people. The minister saying he had a mandate to modernise the country's railway and restore it to safety. More on the story throughout the day here on BBC World News. Do stay with us. You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News. Angry words over Ukraine as the US and Russia come face to face at the G20 meeting in Delhi. Sergei Lavrov accuses the West of using blackmail and threats to undermine support for its invasion. Washington says Antony Blinken spoke to his counterpart from Moscow for just 10 minutes. Enough time to reinstate America's support for Ukraine. Russia now says it won't sign the usual G20 declaration. We'll ask if the disagreements mean diplomacy is not working. Also ahead, protests in Greece at the head-on train collision which killed at least 42. There have been resignations and court appearances, but will that be enough to end the anger? And an area of natural beauty under threat in the Philippines as a sunken tanker starts to leak oil. Autism meant he didn't speak until he was 11 years old. Now he's lecturing at Cambridge University. We're going to bring you the amazing story of Jason Ade. In the next half hour, we'll take you live to Delhi, Riga and Greece. Russia says there's been no joint declaration at the G20 foreign ministers meeting in India after angry exchanges between Washington and Moscow over the invasion of Ukraine. The US Secretary of State said the talks have been marred by the unprovoked and unjustified attack. Russian officials, meanwhile, said Moscow and Beijing had agreed to oppose what they called Western blackmail and threats, but this hasn't been confirmed yet by China. Let's take you straight to Delhi. We can join the BBC's Zubair Ahmed, who is there for us. So, Zubair, angry words exchanged. I guess to some extent people were expecting this, the tension over Ukraine to dominate the meeting. Professor Zoe Christoforou, thank you very much for joining us. And let's just return you to the scene now, where we know as well 3 days of national mourning declared. And in Greece, these pictures just causing not only a huge amount of sorrow and sadness, but also real anger, as we've just been reflecting on when this passenger service crashed head-on into a freight train. And to remind you that many of the 350 passengers who were on board that train were students. They were only in their 20s. They were returning to Thessaloniki after a long weekend celebrating Greek Orthodox Lent. So a real tragedy for Greece, and national mourning being observed today. You are live with Lucy Hockings. Still to come, we bring you the amazing story of Jason Ade, who only learned to read and write at the age of 18 and has just been appointed as a professor at Cambridge University. And we'll explain why the US had harsh words for Israel following the latest upsurge in violence in the West Bank. You're You're live with Lucy Hockings. A tanker that sunk in the Philippines on Tuesday has started to leak its cargo of oil, and that is threatening to pollute nearby marine reserves. The ship is called the Princess Empress. It went down in rough seas near the island of Mindoro after its engines failed. So search teams are there. They're trying to locate the sunken vessel so they can siphon off the oil. With more on that, here's our Asia Pacific editor, Mickey Bristow.
Celestina Olulode, BBC News, Cambridge.
Wonderful story, and congratulations to him. Another classic and wonderful story for you, because we love the story of the underdog. And we've got one in the sports arena. In the UK last night's FA Cup fifth round, there was a classic. League Two club Grimsby Town beat Premier League side Southampton 2-1. Grimsby scoring two penalties either side of half-time to give them a shock 2-goal lead. After getting one goal back in the 65th minute, Southampton had their equaliser disallowed, and that sends Grimsby into the sixth round. Now, to put this into context, they're the first club in FA Cup history to eliminate 5 teams from a higher division than them in a single campaign. And there are pictures of this doing the rounds, and you may be very curious, living around the world, why a whole lot of Grimsby fans are holding up a fish. This is a significant fish. He is Harry the Haddock, and he is the mascot of the Grimsby team, the marine mascot, fished out for major games to help fans cheer on the Mariners. And it was amazing to see them all being held up at the celebrating fans as they were holding them up last night. See you again soon. You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News. Angry words over Ukraine as the US and Russia come face to face at the G20 meeting in Delhi. Russia's Sergei Lavrov accuses the West of using blackmail and threats to undermine support for its invasion. But Washington's Antony Blinken used a 10-minute meeting with his Russian counterpart to restate America's support for Kyiv. There's been protests in Greece at the head-on train collision which killed at least 42. There have been resignations and court appearances, but will that be enough to end the anger? And a royal residence row as King Charles asks Harry and Meghan to give up the Windsor home given to them by the late Queen Elizabeth. In the next half hour, we'll have the latest from Delhi, Greece, Geneva and Windsor Castle. There have been protests in Greece over the rail crash which killed 43 people. Many see this as an accident that had been waiting to happen. Prime Minister Mitsotakis says a committee of experts will investigate the causes of the disaster and that everything pointed to human error being to blame. But rail union members say safety systems weren't working properly and there had been repeated warnings about this. Nick Beek reports from Larissa. Do stay with us here on BBC World News, still to come. This is the 5-bedroom house that Harry and Meghan left behind when they moved to California. Now King Charles is taking it back. We'll ask what this means for the relationship between father and son. You're live with Lucy Hockings. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been asked to vacate their British base, Frogmore Cottage. They were reportedly told to leave the property by Buckingham Palace back in January, days after Prince Harry published his memoir, Spare. The home is in the grounds of Windsor Castle. It had allegedly been offered to the Duke of York. Buckingham Palace is yet to comment. Here's our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell. It is always lovely to have you with us, Nick. Thank you so much. Good to have you with us too as well. Yelda is up next with Impact. Bye-bye.